I told you to bring the documents. Where are they?
We had them, sir, but something happened.
Don't lie to me.
He's not lying.
You better step back right now. Don't test me. We're not moving. This ends now. Leave him alone. I told you to stop. Don't you dare move. Please, I can't breathe. It hurts. You're going nowhere. Stop, you're hurting him.
Boots. The first thing Officer Wade Kessler said to the two men on the bench was not a question. It was an order. Boots. Get up, both of you. Hands where I can see them. He said it the way a man says something he has said 100 times before, certain of the answer, certain of his own authority, certain that the two black men in front of him would fold the way everyone else always folded. Boots. He had no idea he was standing 3 feet from a federal wiretap that had taken 19 months to build. Boots. He had no idea the briefcase 40 yards away held $4 million belonging to the Cordero Cartel, and he had absolutely no idea that in less than 6 hours he would be sitting in a windowless room in downtown Houston, watching his entire life collapse onto a steel table, one photograph at a time. Boots. The heat over Founders Square Park that afternoon was the kind that pressed down on the back of your neck like a hand. Boots. It was the second week of August, 94 degrees by 10 in the morning, the kind of Houston heat that made the asphalt shimmer and the tourists retreat under whatever shade they could find near the reflecting pool. Boots. The park was quiet in the particular way government buildings make a place quiet. Office workers moving fast with iced coffee, a woman with a stroller by the fountain, a food cart vendor named Otis Grant wiping down his cart for the 3rd time in an hour because there was nothing else to do. Boots. On a bench near the pool, half shaded by a live oak that had been there longer than the courthouse behind it, sat two men who, to anyone walking past, looked like exactly nothing. Boots. That was the point. Special Agent Marcus Webb was 43 years old, 6'1", built like a man who had once played linebacker and never quite let the muscle go soft. Boots. He wore a faded gray hoodie zipped halfway, sleeves pushed up, jeans with a hole starting at the left knee, and a pair of running shoes that had seen better summers. Boots. Underneath the hoodie, resting flat against his ribs, was a Kevlar vest, and clipped to a reinforced belt at his hip was a Glock 19 he had qualified on 11 times without missing a single course. Boots. Beside him sat Special Agent Derek Coleman, 30 years old, a former Army Ranger with 2 deployments behind him and a mind that moved faster than most people's mouths. Boots. Derek wore an unbuttoned flannel shirt over a plain white tee, dark jeans, and steel-toed boots that made him look like he belonged on a construction site instead of a federal task force. Boots. Both men were black. In the eyes of the block they were watching, they looked like two guys killing time on a hot day. Boots. In reality, they were the lead agents on Operation Silent Ledger, a 19-month FBI investigation built to dismantle the Houston financial network of the Cordero Cartel from the inside out. Boots. "Com check," Marcus said, his lips barely moving, the words dissolving into the sound of the fountain. "Read you clear, Webb," came the voice of Supervisory Special Agent Victor Hargrove, sitting 4 blocks away inside an unmarked cable repair van, eyes locked on 6 different camera feeds. Boots. "Target is approaching from the north entrance. He has the case." "Copy," Derek murmured, adjusting a pair of sunglasses that cost $11 at a gas station on Fannin Street. Boots. Eyes on the drop. The target was Elliot Faircross, a laundering specialist, the cartel's Houston cell, called simply the accountant, a man so careful he had never once been photographed making a physical exchange in 11 years of moving money. Boots. Today, according to 4 confidential sources and 200 hours of surveillance, Faircross was carrying a hard drive containing wire routing information for over $4 million in cartel proceeds, along with the physical ledger that named every distributor between Corpus Christi and Baton Rouge. Boots. If Marcus and Derek could intercept that handoff, it would be the single largest blow ever struck against the Cordero network in the state of Texas. Boots. 19 months of undercover buys, of wiretaps that nearly got a confidential informant killed, of sleepless nights spent staring at spreadsheets in a rented office above a laundromat on Telephone Road, all of it collapsed down into the next 4 minutes on a park bench in 94-degree heat. Boots. Neither man saw the Houston Police Department cruiser rolling slowly down Rusk Street until it was already too late to matter. Boots. Behind the wheel sat Officer Wade Kessler, 41 years old, 11 years on the force, a personnel file thick enough to double as a doorstop. Boots, 6 use-of-force complaints, 3 internal affairs investigations, 2 lawsuits settled quietly by the city with confidentiality clauses attached like a leash. Boots. He had survived every review board thanks to a union contract with more loopholes than a fishing net, and the department had responded the only way it knew how. By burying him somewhere he couldn't do much damage, which meant slow afternoon patrols through a downtown park that mostly needed someone to shoo away skateboarders. Boots. Kessler hated the assignment. He hated the heat radiating off his cruiser's hood. Boots. And more than either of those things, he hated the specific, curdled feeling of being ignored, which was exactly what it felt like when he looked at 2 men sitting calmly on a bench, dressed for winter in August, watching the pedestrian path with an attention he did not understand, and instantly decided he did not need to. Boots. His mind built the story before his cruiser had even come to a stop. Dealers, or a mugging setup, or anything that would let him be the man in charge again. Boots. He didn't call it in. He didn't run the plates on a nearby van he'd have noticed if he'd been paying attention to anything other than his own reflection in the 2 men's stillness. Boots. He hopped the curb, parked his cruiser at an angle across the pedestrian walkway so that anyone passing would have to step around it, and killed the engine. Boots. Look at these 2, Kessler muttered to no one, unclipping the retention strap on his holster, a habit he'd developed years ago because it made people flinch before he'd even said a word. Boots. On the bench, Derek caught the flash of the light bar reflected off the water and did not move his head. Boots. Dave, he said, using Marcus's undercover name, low and even. Local 3 o'clock, he's coming straight for us. Hargrove, do you have eyes on this? Boots. Marcus said into his collar. I see him, Hargrove answered, the tension already climbing into his voice. He's not on our liaison list. Boots. He didn't call it in, he's freelancing. Do not blow the operation, Faircross is 90 seconds out. Be smooth, get rid of him. Boots. Easier said than done, Marcus muttered, watching Kessler swagger toward them, chest forward, sunglasses catching the sun. One hand resting on his belt like a man walking onto a stage he believed belonged to him alone. Boots. Kessler stopped 6 feet from the bench and planted his boots wide. Parks closed for maintenance in this section, he announced, which was a lie so obvious that a mother feeding pigeons 30 yards away didn't even look up. Boots. Marcus leaned back, adopting the loose, unhurried posture of a man with nothing to hide, because he had learned that posture long before he ever earned a federal badge. He had learned it as a teenager on the east side of Houston, on porches and street corners where his father had drilled the same 3 rules into him since he was 12 years old. Boots. Keep your hands visible, keep your voice low, never let them see you flinch. Just catching some shade, officer, Marcus said, his voice smooth, almost friendly. Boots. Hot one today. We'll clear out in a few minutes. Derek said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the northern path, where a tall man in a charcoal suit had just stepped through the entrance, a brushed steel briefcase swinging gently against his leg. Boots. Faircross. Right on schedule. Target's on site, Hargrove said urgently. He's moving to the drop point. Hold position. Do not engage the officer. Boots. Kessler had not liked Marcus's calm one bit. Calm did not feed the particular hunger in him. He stepped closer, close enough that the smell of drugstore cologne and gas station coffee rolled over the bench. Boots. I didn't ask if you were comfortable, he snapped. I told you to move. What are you 2 doing out here dressed like it's 40 degrees? Boots. You looking to score? You casing somebody? No, sir, Derek said, turning his head just enough to be respectful without breaking his read on Faircross. Boots. Waiting on a friend. We'll be gone shortly. Stand up, Kessler ordered. 40 yards away, Faircross had taken a seat at a small cafe table, setting the briefcase carefully between his feet. Boots. A heavy-set man in a golf shirt was crossing the plaza toward him, unhurried, professional, the way men move when they have done this exact walk 100 times before. Boots. The handoff was about to happen. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Officer, he said, letting a colder note slide into his voice, we are not doing anything wrong. Boots. We're sitting on a public bench. I'd suggest you go check on whoever's giving you trouble today, because it isn't us. Boots. It was the wrong sentence to say to a man like Kessler. The word suggest landed on his ego like a slap. Boots. His face reddened beneath his sunglasses. Oh, you'd suggest, he repeated, unclipping his radio. Dispatch, Unit 44. I've got 2 non-compliant subjects at Founders Square. Possible narcotics activity. Requesting a secondary unit. Boots. Copy, Unit 44. A dispatcher's voice crackled back. Secondary unit en route. Paul, Coleman. The handoff is happening right now. Hargrove's voice snapped through their earpieces. Boots. Eyes on Faircross. The man in the golf shirt slid a manila envelope across the cafe table. Marcus and Derek's eyes cut sideways for half a second, and that half a second was all Kessler needed to decide he'd caught something. Boots. Let me see some ID, Kessler barked, pulling out his notepad. Government names, both of you, right now. They were carrying alias documentation. Boots. Marcus was Andre Simmons. Derek was Terrell Boyd. Handing over those IDs meant a prolonged interrogation, meant breaking eye contact with the exchange happening 40 yards away, meant risking everything the moment Faircross's eyes drifted toward the commotion. Boots. Don't have it on us, man, Derek said, keeping his voice loose. Left our wallets in the truck, over by the garage on Travis. Boots. Kessler smiled the particular smile of a man who believes he has already won, no ID, refusing a lawful order. Boots. You're about 10 seconds from eating pavement. Stand up, hands behind your back. Officer Kesler, Marcus said, reading the name off the tag, and something in his voice changed completely. The street cadence gone, replaced by something flat, cold, and absolutely unafraid. Boots. You are interfering with something you do not have clearance to understand. Walk back to your vehicle now. For one fraction of a second, Kessler hesitated, some animal part of him recognizing that this was not the reaction he was used to getting. Boots. But his pride moved faster than his instincts ever could. Are you threatening a police officer? He hissed, his hand sliding off his pepper spray and closing around his taser instead. Boots. Target's making the exchange, Hargrove barked. Move in! Move in now! Marcus and Derek rose from the bench at the exact same instant, eyes locked on the cafe table, and to Wade Kessler, standing there with his ego already bruised and his hand already on a weapon, that single unified movement did not look like 2 men complying. Boots. It looked like an attack.
I said hands behind your back.
Kessler roared and lunged. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his hoodie and wrenched him backward with a violence that had nothing to do with police procedure and everything to do with a man who had waited his whole shift for a reason to feel powerful. Boots. Marcus's shoulder cracked against the iron armrest of the bench. Back off, Derek shouted, both hands rising in the universal gesture of a man trying to de-escalate a situation that had nothing left in it to de-escalate. Boots. Assaulting an officer resisting arrest, Kessler screamed, spiraling into a panic entirely of his own making, and jammed his taser directly into Derek's ribs. Boots. Get on the ground, or I light you up. At the cafe table 40 yards away, the heavyset man heard the shouting, looked over, saw a uniformed officer wrestling 2 men to the ground, and understood instantly what every cartel courier is trained to understand. Chaos means law enforcement, and law enforcement means run. Boots. He grabbed the case, shoved the envelope back into Faircross's hands, and bolted toward Congress Street. Faircross didn't hesitate for even a second. Boots. He turned and melted into a crowd of tourists near the water wall, gone before Marcus could take a single step toward him. Boots. No, Marcus said, watching 19 months of work dissolve in front of his eyes. Hargrove, he's rabbiting. North exit, gray suit. Boots. We see him, Hargrove's voice snapped back, furious and helpless in equal measure. Units are 3 minutes out. He's getting into a cab. Boots. Damn it, Webb. We lost him. The realization hit Marcus like ice water down the spine. The money was gone, the ledger was gone, 19 months of his life were gone, and all of it because a beat cop with a grudge against the world had decided 2 black men on a bench looked like trouble. Boots. On the ground, Kessler screamed, spit flying as he shoved Derek face first against the hot iron slats. Take it easy, we're complying, Derek said through his teeth, letting the cuffs bite into his wrists because he had learned the same 3 rules Marcus had. Survival first, truth later. Boots. Kessler ratcheted the cuffs far tighter than department policy allowed, the steel biting a deep red line into Derek's skin. Boots. Your turn, he sneered at Marcus, breathing hard, high on the specific adrenaline that comes from finally feeling in control of something. Boots. Officer Kesler, Marcus said, his voice terrifyingly calm now, devoid of fear, almost gentle. You just cost the United States government a $4 million seizure. Boots. You just let a cartel money launderer walk. My name is Special Agent Marcus Webb. The man you just tased is Special Agent Derek Coleman. Boots. We are with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Kessler paused for half a second. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. Boots. And then he looked at the hoodie, the worn shoes, the color of Marcus's skin, and something in him simply refused to compute what was standing in front of him. Boots. He laughed, sharp and mocking. FBI. Sure, and I'm the mayor. He spun Marcus around, kicked his legs apart hard enough to nearly buckle his knee, and slammed him against the bench beside Derek. Boots. You two are pathetic, he said, patting down Marcus's sides, already imagining the arrest report he'd write, already imagining the commendation he thought this would earn him. Boots. Impersonating a federal agent. That's a felony, boys. Let's see what you're really carrying. His hand slid under the hoodie, expecting a baggie or an unregistered pistol. Boots. Instead, his fingers found a molded holster with a Glock 19 secured inside it, and beside that, clipped to a reinforced tactical belt, a heavy leather credential case. Boots. His smirk faltered. He pulled the case out, flipped it open, and the harsh Houston sun caught the polished gold shield inside, the blue enamel Department of Justice seal, the laminated card with Marcus Webb's photograph, and the director's signature printed beneath it. Boots. The park went completely silent. Even the fountain seemed to quiet. The only sound left was Kessler's own breathing, suddenly shallow, suddenly uneven. Boots. It's fake, Kessler stammered, though every trace of his bravado had already drained out of his voice. You bought this online. Boots. Good. Good fake, though. Check my left pocket, Derek said from the bench, his cheek still pressed against the scorching iron, his voice dripping with something colder than anger. Boots. Go ahead. See how many fake federal badges you can find in one afternoon, Wade. With hands that had begun to shake, Kessler reached into Derek's shirt pocket and pulled out a second gold shield. Boots. That was the exact moment the sound of sirens tore through the plaza. Not the two-tone wail of Houston PD backup that Kessler had called in 20 minutes earlier, but something entirely different. Boots. 3 black SUVs came tearing across the pedestrian walkways, tires chewing through the grass surrounding Kessler's cruiser in a triangle. Boots. Doors flew open. A dozen tactical agents in olive drab vests marked FBI in 6-inch yellow letters poured out onto the plaza, and at the front of them walked Supervisory Special Agent Victor Hargrove, a broad-shouldered man in a tailored suit whose expression promised a very specific kind of reckoning. Boots. Hargrove walked straight past Kessler without so much as a glance and crouched in front of the bench. Webb. Coleman. Boots. You hurt? He asked, his voice cutting through the humid air like a blade. Just our pride, boss, Marcus said, rolling his shoulders. Boots. And our wrists. Officer Kesler here has a heavy hand. Hargrove turned his gaze on Kessler with the slow, deliberate weight of a man deciding exactly how much restraint he owed him. Boots. Kessler stood frozen, 2 federal badges still clutched in his trembling hands, watching a dozen armed agents settle their attention on him with an intensity that made his stomach drop. Boots. I want to be very clear about something before we go any further, Marcus said, standing up and rubbing the deep red marks pressed into his wrists. Boots. Because what happened on this bench in the next 4 minutes was only the beginning. What Wade Kessler did not know, could not have known, standing there with his ego collapsing in real time, was that the worst part of his afternoon was still 3 hours away, sitting quietly in the trunk of his own patrol car. Boots. Hargrove did not raise his voice. He never needed to. The keys, he said, holding out one hand, his tone a low, gravel baritone that seemed to suck the remaining air out of the plaza. Boots. Kessler fumbled at his belt, his fingers suddenly clumsy, and finally managed to unclip his keyring, handing it over like a child surrendering a weapon he'd been told never to touch. Boots. Hargrove didn't even look at him. He tossed the keys to a tactical agent, who circled the bench and released Derek's cuffs, then Marcus's. Boots. Marcus rolled his shoulders and bent to retrieve his fallen badge from the concrete, dusting it off with the calm precision of a man who had done this exact motion in his head 1,000 times before, ever needing to do it for real. Boots. I didn't know, Kessler stammered, his eyes darting between the dozen federal weapons resting casually in the hands of the tactical team surrounding him. Boots. They weren't wearing ID, they were loitering in a high-incident area. It was a standard field stop. Boots. Your job, Marcus said, stepping toward him, the last trace of the calm street persona gone now, replaced with something that had been building in him for 19 months, and longer than that if he was honest with himself, is to patrol. to call in your stops to dispatch, and to respect the Constitution you swore an oath to. Boots. You didn't run our descriptions. You didn't notify dispatch until after you'd already grabbed me. You walked past 3 other groups in this park, doing things that actually violate a city ordinance, to come straight for us. Boots. And when I asked you to step back, you assaulted my partner with a taser. I had probable cause, Kessler said, though his voice cracked in a way that made the sentence sound more like a question. Boots. You had prejudice, Derek said, stepping up beside Marcus, and because of that prejudice, a primary target in a 19-month cartel investigation just walked out of this park with $4 million. Boots. The wail of Houston PD backup finally reached the plaza, 2 cruisers skidding onto the grass, boxing in the federal vehicles. Boots. 4 uniformed officers spilled out, hands on their holsters, expecting a hostage situation, finding instead a wall of federal agents surrounding one of their own. Boots. Sergeant Paul Renner, Kessler's shift supervisor, a gray-haired 20-year veteran, with the tired eyes of a man who had covered for Kessler more times than he wanted to admit, pushed his way to the front. Boots. What in God's name is going on here? Renner demanded, looking at Hargrove. Who's in charge? Why is my officer surrounded like this? Boots. I am, Hargrove said, flashing his credentials. Supervisory Special Agent Victor Hargrove, FBI Organized Crime Task Force. And your officer isn't surrounded, Sergeant. Boots. He's in federal custody. Renner blinked. Custody for what? Now hold on, Agent. Let's not get carried away here. If my guy overstepped on a stop, we handle it internally. Boots. Professional courtesy, we write him up. Send it to Internal Affairs. Nobody needs a scene. Professional courtesy, Marcus repeated, a short, bitter laugh escaping him before he could stop it. Boots. He turned to face Renner directly, pointing a finger at Kessler, without looking at him. Your officer didn't overstep. He blew a federal wiretap operation, 19 months in the making. Boots. He physically assaulted 2 federal agents in the performance of their duties. That's deprivation of rights under color of law. Title 18, Section 242. Boots. That's assault on a federal officer, Section 111. Both are federal felonies, Sergeant. Internal Affairs doesn't get this one. We do. Boots. Renner turned to look at Kessler, and something in his expression shifted from defensive to disgusted in the space of a breath. Boots. Jesus, Wade. What did you do? They looked like trouble, Sarge, Kessler said, and there was real desperation in it now, a man watching the floor open beneath him. Boots. Look at how they were dressed. I was being proactive. Disarm him, Hargrove said, and 2 tactical agents stepped forward. Boots. Wait, Sarge, Kessler said, climbing his throat. You can't let them do this. I'm a city officer. But Renner had already raised both hands and taken a step backward, abandoning him completely. Boots. You're on your own, Wade. I'm not catching an obstruction charge for you. Agent Webb, Hargrove said. Do the honors. Boots. Marcus walked up to Kessler, who flinched, bracing for a shove that never came. Instead, Marcus reached out with a kind of cold, deliberate calm and unsnapped the retention strap on Kessler's holster, pulling his service weapon free and handing it off. Boots. Then the radio. Then the taser and the spare magazines. Finally, he unbuckled the entire duty belt and let it fall to the concrete with a heavy, final thud, leaving Kessler standing there in a sweat-soaked uniform, stripped of every tool he had ever used to make people flinch. Boots. Turn around, Marcus said softly. Please, Kessler whispered, a tear cutting a track through the sweat on his cheek. Don't cuff me in front of everybody. Boots. I'll turn in my badge today, I swear it. Marcus leaned in close, his voice pitched low, meant for Kessler alone. Boots. Think about how many people you've said that exact thing to right before you slammed the cuffs on them anyway. Boots. Think about how many afternoons like this you've handed out over 11 years without once looking back. I don't care about your dignity, Wade. Boots. You never cared about theirs. He turned Kessler around and locked the cuffs onto his wrists, tight enough to be felt, not tight enough to injure, a distinction Kessler himself had never once bothered to make. Boots. Wade Kessler. You are under arrest for assault on a federal officer and deprivation of civil rights under color of law, Marcus said, loud enough for the gathering crowd of tourists and silent Houston officers to hear every word. Boots. You have the right to remain silent. I'd use it, if I were you. As Marcus and Derek walked him toward the black SUV, a woman near the fountain lowered her phone, her hand shaking. The video she'd been recording for the last 90 seconds still running. Boots. Her name was Priya Anand, 26 years old, a cashier at a food stand near the reflecting pool, and she had been standing frozen through the entire encounter, too afraid to step forward, too afraid of what it might cost her. She was 11 months into an 18-month probation term for a shoplifting charge she still swore she hadn't committed, and the last thing on earth she could afford, was to be the woman who got involved in a scene with the police. Boots. She hated herself a little for the stillness in her own body, even as her thumb kept recording. Boots. Nearby, Otis Grant, the food cart vendor, had stopped wiping down art entirely, both hands flat on the metal counter, watching the whole thing with the particular grief of a 68-year-old black man who had seen this exact scene play out differently, and worse, more times in his life than he cared to count. Boots. He didn't say anything either. But when the SUV doors slammed shut and the agents began to disperse, Otis quietly crossed the plaza to where Priya was still standing with her phone in her trembling hand. Boots. You should keep that footage somewhere safe, he said, his voice low. Somewhere they can't make you delete it. She looked at him, and for the first time in 90 seconds, she remembered how to breathe. Boots. I know, she said. I know. Neither of them could have known yet how much that shaky 90-second video would matter 4 months later in a federal courtroom in front of a jury that had never met Wade Kessler and would come to know exactly who he was. Boots. The holding room at the FBI's Houston field office on Justice Park Lane was built to feel like nothing at all. Gray walls, no windows, a steel table bolted to the concrete floor, and a heavy ring welded to the wall for exactly the purpose it now served. Boots. Kessler had been sitting there for 6 hours in an orange jumpsuit, his own uniform seized as evidence, no phone call, no water beyond what a federal guard silently placed in front of him once. Boots. Every time he asked for his union representative, Gary Nash, the guard outside the door simply looked at him and said nothing. Boots. Kessler spent those 6 hours doing the only thing his mind could offer him, calculating, a mistake, he kept telling himself. Boots. A misunderstanding that a decent lawyer could plead down. I'll lose the pension. I won't lose my freedom. He was leaning on decades of quiet institutional habit, the thin blue line that had rescued him from every prior review board, and he had absolutely no idea how far past that line he had already fallen. Boots. The door clicked and swung open. Marcus and Derek walked in wearing sharp dark suits now, freshly showered, moving with the unhurried confidence of men who no longer needed to hide anything about themselves. Boots. Behind them came a tall, severe woman carrying a thick manila folder, Assistant United States Attorney Rachel Voss. All three sat across from Kessler. Boots. Nobody spoke for a full minute, and in that silence, Kessler's handcuffs clinked once against the steel ring as he shifted his weight. Boots. Where's my union rep? Kessler finally demanded, trying to summon whatever was left of his old bravado. I know my rights. Boots. I'm not saying a word until Gary Nash walks through that door. Mr. Nash was turned away at the lobby 3 hours ago, Voss said, her expression giving away nothing. Boots. He handles disciplinary hearings for the Houston Police Department. You are currently facing a federal grand jury indictment, Mr. Kessler. Boots. Your union cannot help you in this building. I want a lawyer, Kessler said, swallowing hard. You'll have a public defender assigned at your arraignment tomorrow morning, Voss replied smoothly. Boots. But before we book you into pretrial holding, Agents Webb and Coleman thought you should see what our evidence response team found. Boots. Found where? Kessler said, his heart rate visibly spiking beneath the thin orange fabric. Marcus leaned forward, lacing his fingers together on the table. Boots. While you were sitting in here, Wade, our tech team executed a federal search warrant on your cruiser. Standard protocol for a bad stop. We pull the dash and body cam footage. Boots. We did. It's damning enough on its own. You didn't have your lights on, you didn't run our descriptions, and you texted another officer 3 minutes before you ever walked up to that bench. Boots. Derek slid an 8x10 photograph across the table. It was a screenshot of a text thread. Got 2 thugs casing Founders Square. Boots. Officer Pruitt, you calling it in? Nah, going to shake 'em down myself. They're holding something. The text destroyed any last defense of proactive policing and turned it into something with a name, premeditation. Boots. Kessler closed his eyes. That text gets you 5 years on its own, Marcus said quietly. But that's not why we're sitting here. Boots. Derek slid 3 more photographs across the table, one at a time, the way a dealer lays down a hand he already knows has won. Boots. The first showed the open trunk of Kessler's cruiser, with the spare tire pulled out. The second showed a false floor, pan welded beneath the wheel well. Boots. The third showed what had been hidden inside it, a black duffel bag containing 4 unserialized handguns, several dozen bundles of fentanyl-laced pills wrapped in electrical tape, and a vacuum-sealed brick of cash that federal counters would later confirm at $91,400. Boots. We pulled 18 months of GPS logs off your cruiser, Voss said, her voice going flat and clinical. They line up, almost to the hour, with 11 unsolved stash house robberies across Patrol Division 7. Boots. Robberies where the victims described assailants in what sounded exactly like department-issued tactical gear. You weren't coming over to us because you thought we were casing the park, Derek said slowly, watching the last of the color drain out of Kessler's face. Boots. You saw 2 black men and decided we were street level, decided we were probably carrying cash. You never called dispatch because you didn't want backup. Boots. You wanted us alone. It's not what it looks like, Kessler whispered, his voice shaking so badly the words barely held together. Boots. It looks exactly like what it is, Marcus said, and there was no heat left in his voice at all, only something colder and far more permanent. Boots. A corrupt officer who used a badge as a license to rob the very people he was sworn to protect, and who happened to walk into the middle of an active federal cartel investigation on the one day it could cost him everything. Boots. Voss closed the folder with a sharp snap. Possession with intent to distribute. Possession of unserialized firearms. Armed robbery under color of law. Boots. Deprivation of civil rights. Obstruction of a federal investigation. And as of 40 minutes ago, Mr. Kessler, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, executed a raid on your precinct. Boots. The FBI is assuming oversight of Patrol Division 7 effective immediately. Whatever you and your friends were running is finished. Boots. Marcus stood, looking down at the man now sobbing quietly into the steel table, his wrists still tethered to the wall. Boots. There was no satisfaction in his eyes. There was only the cold, settled finality of a predator that had for once walked directly into its own trap. Boots. Enjoy the transfer, Wade, he said and turned toward the door. I hear former cops make a lot of new friends in federal custody. Boots. The heavy steel door closed behind them with a sound like a verdict. 3 miles away, at the Patrol Division 7 station house on Cavalcade Street, Captain Dennis Holloway was leaning back in his chair with his tie loosened and a lukewarm cup of coffee in his hand, entirely unaware that his career had roughly 11 minutes left in it. Boots. Holloway had run his precinct for 6 years, the way a landlord runs a building he doesn't intend to fix. He'd heard the rumors about skimmed evidence, about officers who handled complaints in-house rather than on paper, and as long as the crime statistics looked acceptable for the mayor's monthly report, he had chosen deliberately not to look any closer. Boots. He did not hear the boots on the pavement outside. The precinct's glass doors were thrown open hard enough to rattle the frames, and 50 federal agents in dark tactical gear, marked FBI and DOJ civil rights, flooded the lobby with a coordination that froze every officer in the bullpen mid-motion. Boots. Federal agents, secure your weapons, step away from your desks. A voice boomed over a bullhorn. Nobody touches a keyboard. Boots. 2 agents sealed the armory with a federal padlock. 3 more disappeared into the server room and began pulling drives. Boots. Upstairs, the door to Holloway's office did not open. It was kicked off its hinges. Hargrove walked through the splintered frame, flanked by 2 agents carrying breaching shotguns, and slammed a 50-page federal search warrant onto Holloway's desk without a word of preamble. Boots. Captain Holloway, you are relieved of command. Step away from the desk. Holloway shot to his feet, his face flushing purple. Boots. What is the meaning of this? You cannot storm a municipal precinct. I'll have the mayor's office on the phone in 2 minutes. Boots. You're not calling anyone, Hargrove said, stepping close enough that Holloway had to look up at him. The Department of Justice has authorized a full federal takeover of this division under the racketeering statute. Boots. We have sworn testimony, GPS data, and physical evidence of an organized robbery operation being run out of this building using city vehicles and city resources. Boots. 5 of your officers are already in cuffs downstairs. Your patrol commander is being pulled off Interstate 45 as we speak. Boots. Holloway's bravado collapsed all at once, like a building coming down on its own foundation, a robbery ring. Who told you this? Boots. Officer Wade Kessler, Hargrove said. Turned out to be a very talkative afternoon. Boots. By the time the sun dropped low over the bayou, Marcus and Derek were back at the field office, gloved hands moving carefully over the contents of Kessler's hidden compartment spread across an aluminum table, the cash, the fentanyl, the unregistered pistols, and, most importantly, a small black notebook Kessler had kept with the meticulous, damning precision of a man who never imagined anyone else would read it. Boots. Derek flipped through the pages. I can't believe this guy kept a ledger of his own crimes, he muttered. Dates, addresses, cash estimates. Boots. It's a confession with a spiral binding. Marcus wasn't listening. He was staring at a digital map on the wall monitor, cross-referencing addresses from Kessler's notebook against the Bureau's existing surveillance files on Cordero Cartel property. Boots. He typed fast, pulling utility records, then stopped cold, leaning in. Derek, he said, his voice dropping. Read me the address from the entry marked June the 14th. Boots. Derek flipped back, 1441 Bayshore Unit 4B. Why? Marcus entered it into the cartel database. A red pin dropped directly onto a known Cordero front property. Boots. Now the one from July 2nd. 900 Polk, the old tire shop, Derek read, already crossing the room toward the screen. Boots. Another red pin bloomed, another perfect match. He wasn't robbing street dealers, Marcus said slowly, a grim, dawning realization spreading across his face. Boots. He was robbing cartel drop points. He thought he was shaking down small-time hustlers. He was blind robbing the Cordero Cartel, and somehow he never once got shot for it. Boots. They didn't shoot back because his crew hit those addresses in full tactical gear, Derek said, putting the pieces together out loud. Boots. The cartel thought they were being legitimately raided. They took the loss and relocated, instead of retaliating against what they believed was law enforcement. Boots. Marcus's heart was hammering now. Look at the last entry. Dated last night. Derek looked down at the open page. Boots. Target 14, 1900 block, Navigation Warehouse Row. Heavy foot traffic. Smell of chemical, solvent. Moving tonight. Marcus grabbed his radio. Boots. Hargrove, this is Webb. I need you back here right now. Silent Ledger isn't dead. What are you talking about, Webb? Hargrove's voice crackled back, still hoarse from the Precinct raid. Boots. Faircross running cost us the ledger and the drive. Faircross is a money man, Marcus said quickly. He doesn't touch product. Boots. Kessler just handed us the address of the cartel's primary distribution warehouse for the entire city, and according to his own notes, his crew was planning to hit it tonight. Boots. If we move first, we don't just recover what Faircross walked away with. We take the whole operation down in one night. Boots. By 9 that evening, the sky over the Houston Ship Channel was split apart by the thundering rotors of 2 federal Black Hawks. Boots. Below them, a column of armored vehicles tore through the warehouse district, and inside the lead vehicle sat Marcus and Derek, dressed in full tactical gear, night vision folded up against their helmets, the sting of the afternoon's failure already burned away by the sheer momentum of what came next. Boots. They hit the warehouse with the force of a controlled hurricane. Flashbangs turned the cavernous interior into strobing white light. Boots. The cartel's overnight security detail, expecting nothing but a quiet shift, never had a chance to organize a defense. In under 5 minutes, the building was fully secured without a single shot fired. Boots. When Marcus and Derek cracked open the steel shipping container at the center of the warehouse floor, they didn't just recover the $4 million Faircross had walked away with earlier that afternoon. Boots. They found $19 million in shrink-wrapped bricks stacked on wooden pallets, the cartel's master physical ledger, and 640 kilograms of uncut fentanyl, the single largest combined drug and currency seizure in the recorded history of the Southern District of Texas. Boots. And every bit of it existed because a beat cop with a grudge and a badge had decided 2 black men on a park bench looked like trouble worth stopping for. Boots. 4 months later, the brutal Houston summer had finally broken into the kind of cool that made people leave their windows cracked at night. Boots. Inside the federal building on Rusk Street, Courtroom 4C was filled well past its posted capacity. Reporters and federal agents and ordinary Houstonians pressed shoulder to shoulder in the wooden pews. Boots. At the defense table sat Wade Kessler, unrecognizable from the man who had swaggered across that plaza in aviator sunglasses 4 months earlier. Boots. He had lost 31 pounds. His hair had gone gray at the temples almost overnight. He wore an oversized federal jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles bound in transport chains that rattled softly whenever he shifted. Boots. There had been no trial. The mountain of evidence, the text messages, the dashcam footage, the ledger in his own handwriting, the drugs in his own trunk, and the testimony of a precinct captain who had flipped rather than face conspiracy charges of his own, had made a fight mathematically impossible. Boots. Kessler had taken a plea agreement solely to take the death penalty for the fentanyl trafficking charge off the table, and even with that concession, he understood, in the quiet hours of the last 4 months, that his life as he had known it was already over. Boots. In the front row of the gallery, behind the prosecution table, sat Marcus and Derek in sharp-tailored suits, their federal shields clipped to their belts. Boots. They watched Kessler not with anger, but with the cold, clinical detachment of men who had already done everything they needed to do. Boots. Behind them sat Priya Anand, who had come forward 2 months earlier to hand her 90-second video directly to the U. Boots. Attorney's office after Otis Grant sat with her for 3 straight nights at his food cart, gently talking her through every fear she had about what it might cost her to speak. Boots. It cost her nothing. Her probation officer, upon hearing why she had been afraid to come forward, wrote a letter to the court on her behalf instead. Boots. Otis sat beside her now, his weathered hands folded in his lap, watching the proceedings with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had waited a long time to see a particular kind of accounting finally take place. Boots. All rise, the bailiff called, and Judge Eleanor Marsh entered, a notoriously exacting federal judge with zero patience for corruption of any kind. Boots. She adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at a stack of sentencing documents thick enough to require both hands to lift. Boots. Be seated, Judge Marsh said, wasting no time on ceremony. She looked directly at the defense table. Mr. Kessler, stand. Boots. Kessler rose slowly, the chains clinking in the otherwise silent room. I have spent the last 4 days reading the Precinct investigation report, Judge Marsh began, her voice carrying without effort to the back row. Boots. I have read victim impact statements from citizens you, unlawfully detained, harassed, and assaulted across your 11-year career, including a statement from Ruth Callahan, 69 years old, who you cited for jaywalking and shoved to the pavement in front of her own grandson outside a grocery store on Homestead Road 2 years ago. Boots. I have read a statement from Andre Mills, a small business owner whose food truck you impounded without cause after he asked you, politely, to move your patrol vehicle out of his loading zone. Boots. I have read the sworn account of a 17-year-old named Deshaun Price, who you stopped and searched 4 separate times in a single school year without ever once filing a report. Boots. And I have read the transcripts of your own text messages in which you openly joked about, quote, shaking down the usual suspects, unquote, because you understood correctly that the people you targeted rarely had the resources to fight back. Boots. Kessler kept his eyes on the floor. He could not look at the judge. He could not look at Marcus or Derek. Boots. He could not look at Ruth Callahan, who sat 2 rows behind the prosecution with her hands folded and her chin held level. Boots. You were given a badge, a firearm, and the public's trust, Judge Marsh continued, her tone hardening with every sentence. Boots. You weaponized all 3. You ran a criminal enterprise from the front seat of a taxpayer-funded patrol vehicle, and when confronted by federal agents actively dismantling a cartel operation, your prejudice and your wounded pride led you to assault them both. Boots. She paused, removing her glasses entirely. The irony is not lost on this court that your own ignorance is precisely what handed federal investigators the key to an entire cartel's Houston infrastructure. Boots. That is not a mitigating factor, Mr. Kessler. That is simply the accident of your own greed. A police officer who uses his badge to commit crimes against the public is the most dangerous criminal this system produces, because he erodes the very foundation every honest officer depends on to do their job safely. Boots. She lifted her gavel. Boots. Wade Kessler on the charges of deprivation of rights under color of law, assault on a federal officer, conspiracy to commit armed robbery, and racketeering. This court sentences you to a term of 444 months, 37 years, in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, without possibility of parole. Boots. You will be remanded to a federal high-security facility, effective immediately. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Kessler's knees buckled, and his public defender caught him by the arm before he could collapse onto the floor entirely. Boots. 37 years. No early release. He would be 78 years old before he ever saw the outside of a fence again, if he survived a federal sentence at all, as a disgraced former officer with a target permanently painted on his back. Boots. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped forward and took Kessler by the arms to lead him from the courtroom, and as they turned him toward the aisle, his eyes met Marcus's for one final, unbearable second. Boots. Marcus did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply held the eye contact, steady and unblinking, a silent reminder of a park bench in August and everything that had grown from it. Boots. In that instant, something in Kessler's face broke that had nothing to do with the sentence and everything to do with recognition. Not an apology, not yet, maybe not ever out loud, but something that flickered behind his eyes like a man finally seeing, 4 months too late, exactly what he had spent 11 years refusing to see. Boots. He looked away first. The marshals led him through the heavy wooden doors, and the sound of his chains faded down the corridor until the courtroom was silent again. Boots. 6 weeks later, in a federal facility outside Beaumont, a guard delivered Kessler his mail during the evening count. A single envelope, no return address, forwarded through the prison chaplain's office. Boots. Inside was a child's drawing in crayon, a stick figure family standing outside a small house, and beneath it, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, a single sentence a grandmother had helped her grandson write after hearing the sentencing on the local news. Boots. My grandma says you scared her, but she still hopes you learn to be kind. Kessler sat on the edge of his bunk for a long time that night, holding the drawing in both hands, and for the first time since the plea hearing, he did not reach for a justification. Boots. He simply sat with it. No one saw him cry, no one needed to. Back in Houston, the crisp autumn air outside the federal building felt clean in a way the summer never had. Boots. Marcus and Derek walked down the wide granite steps together, unbuttoning their suit jackets, sidestepping the media cameras waiting at the bottom in favor of a quieter side street where their unmarked sedan was parked. Boots. 37 years, Derek said, exhaling slowly. You think he lasts even 5 inside? Not our problem anymore, Marcus said, pulling his keys from his pocket. Boots. He looked up at the clear blue sky and felt, for the first time in months, the weight of the entire investigation finally lift off his shoulders. Boots. Patrol Division 7 was under new federal monitored leadership. The Cordero Cartel's Houston operation was, for the moment, in ruins. Boots. And somewhere in a drawer at Marcus's apartment sat the one object he had carried through every single day of the case, without ever mentioning it to Hargrove or the bureau psychologist who checked in on agents after operations like this one. A cracked leather badge wallet that had belonged to his father, Elijah Webb, a Houston patrol detective for 22 years, who had been passed over for promotion 4 separate times. Always for reasons that were never written down anywhere official. Boots. His father had carried that wallet until the day he retired, and he had given it to Marcus the week he graduated Quantico with 4 words that Marcus still heard some nights before he fell asleep. Boots. Make them see you. You want to grab coffee? Derek asked, opening the passenger door. There's a spot near Founders Square. Boots. Good outdoor seating. Nice benches. Marcus stopped for a second, looking at his partner, and a slow, genuine smile finally broke across his face for the first time all day. Boots. Yeah, he said, laughing quietly as he slid into the driver's seat. Just remind me to keep my ID in my front pocket this time. Boots. They pulled out into the Houston traffic, the city moving around them a little slower, a little steadier than it had been 4 months earlier, and entirely unaware of how close one ordinary Tuesday afternoon had come to costing it so much more than a single arrest. Boots. Power without accountability is not authority. It is simply cruelty waiting for permission. Wade Kessler believed, for 11 years, that a badge made him untouchable to the very people he was sworn to protect. Boots. It took one afternoon, 2 federal agents he never bothered to actually look at, and a notebook he never imagined anyone else would read, to prove him wrong in a way that will follow him for the rest of his life. Boots. If this story stayed with you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognize someone in it, maybe even a version of yourself in the crowd who stayed quiet, hit like so, it reaches someone who needs to hear it today. Boots. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that dignity is not something anyone else gets to decide you don't deserve. Boots. And tell me in the comments, honestly, Have you ever stood in that plaza, in one role or another? I read every single one.